All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, absolutely. Do you really quickly want to introduce yourself in your own words? Who are you and what do you do?
All right, my name's Ephraim Colbert. I'm a video producer, radio producer, and I live in Oakland, California.
Okay. All right. So you weren't always in Oakland, California. We met here in
No,
Albuquerque.
yeah, I've been as a moved to Albuquerque. I'd say that's where I spent the majority of my formative years.
Okay.
High school, college, after college. But I've been out in Oakland now for about 7 years.
Okay. So you've
But
been
I
there. Yeah.
I do go to Albuquerque.
You get out here when
Sorry,
you
go ahead.
can because your
Yeah,
family's
I try to
here,
get out there a lot.
right?
Yeah. Mhm. I tend to
Okay.
go back, I'd say about 3 times a year. I mean, this year, of
Mhm.
course, things have changed. So,
Yeah, man. Yeah,
yeah.
tell me about it. I actually interviewed somebody recently that was out in who's from Albuquerque, who's out in Oakland. Felicia Gabaldon. You ever meet her?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like she's in Santa Fe, right? Or
She was in Santa Fe. She was in Santa Fe, but then she's in Oakland now, and she's been out there for like 10 years actually, doing a ton of art and stuff like that. But she was telling me, yeah, that it's very interesting being in a larger city and seeing everything kind of happen, especially during I interviewed her right in the middle of like the BLM kind of resurgence and all that. So she was telling
mm,
me about a lot of what was going on out there and whatnot. So, how's Oakland been treating you?
been treating me pretty well.
Yeah, why'd you go out
I
there in the
mean,
first place?
well, I was working at a school in downtown Albuquerque.
Okay.
I think it was called well, it was what's the name of that? Ace Leadership High School. So it was Architecture, Construction, Engineering High School.
Okay.
And the majority of the teachers that were working there, they were from the Bay Area. I had been out here
Hmm.
before, prior to that, back in 2010, 2007 for dance.
Yeah.
So I used to be a modern dancer.
Okay.
And so after making a couple of trips, I was really curious about the area. Um, and at that point in time, I wanted to stay in education.
Hmm.
The teachers were using a lot of curriculum that they had informed me that they learned in Oakland or in Berkeley, and that there was a lot
Oh.
of interesting things happening with charter schools and education at the time.
Okay.
That's what really piqued my interest in wanting to be here. My girlfriend was applying to different law schools. I told her, why not try some in the Bay? If it does work out, we can both move here together. She got into a school in downtown San Francisco, UC
Yeah.
Hastings, and so we decided to make a move.
Nice, man. That's I
Yeah,
mean that's the best reasons to move, right? Not just randomly and with
yeah,
some intention. Um,
yeah.
so you moved out there, and what brought you, you weren't doing film before, like what kind of like, how did you start, how did that kind of start for you? What piqued your interest, I guess?
Yeah, so it really started with radio. So while
Oh,
living
okay.
out here about 2 years in, I there's a local radio station. It's the first publicly funded radio station in the United States. It's called KPFA,
Mm-hmm.
and they're located in Berkeley. So kpfa.org or 94.1 FM out here in
Mm-hmm.
the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
I joined their apprenticeship program. So the apprenticeship program, kind of, you learn a lot about the ins and outs of radio, podcasting. It really prepares you to be a producer, but
Mm-hmm.
there's several different tracks that you could take, whether you're somebody that wants to be on air talent or someone behind the scenes.
Hmm.
While doing that and working for them, I met a lot of people who were in the film industry
Okay.
because they kind of would tend to either do editing for audio or editing for video.
Right.
And they kind of steered me in that direction.
Hmm.
So I joined a master's program at the Academy of Arts in downtown San Francisco
Mm-hmm.
and decided to put the majority of my focus into video production since I already had the background in audio production.
Okay. All right. So I mean, I only know film at the undergraduate level, and as far as production goes, it's very minimal, at least in Albuquerque. What was it like to being in? I mean, a cool city, honestly, like a larger city at an art school, studying film at a graduate level. Was it very difficult? What were some things that you learned doing that, as far as
Well,
production goes? I guess. Yeah.
I'd say the first semester was definitely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I did have some background in kind of the overall look of Adobe due to
Mm,
have had editing experience with audio.
yeah.
Transitioning a message visually versus audibly was challenging, I'd say, for the first semester.
Sure.
But what is really nice about the program that I went through is there were a lot of different ways in which they provided help for your learning.
Hmm.
And I think what also was beneficial for this program
Hmm.
is it taught you the business aspect of
Mm,
becoming a producer.
okay.
Because, you know, like with school, you do learn a lot of theory, but
Sure.
it takes time to really develop who you are, your style, and how
That
you produce things.
the business acumen as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but the business thing tends to be what a lot of artists lack, right?
Right.
So they might
Right.
be a bit more talented, but if they don't know how to like create a production budget, for example, or where to get started on that, their work is less.
Okay.
So basically, when I work with clients, if I show in my abilities that I understand some of these principles that they would be looking for, whether it's
Hmm.
applying for grants or going to their HR department and saying they need more funds, they're more willing to work with me.
Okay. That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
man. That is something that I was fortunate enough. There was one class at UNM, right, that had was business for artists. It was very general, very broad, and I ended up using that to kind of create what I'm doing. A lot of the business stuff that I do these days, but yeah, you kind of the art schools. A lot of the time, you do get failed in that sense, in how to be a business person, how to like market yourself, right? Because
Yeah.
you're effectively a business and you have to do every single part of it, and if people aren't just going to come to you for art, right, so you have to get your
Right.
name out there, do all that kind of stuff, self promote. So it is a hustle even thereafter. So that's very interesting. So I mean, did you study a lot of theory, or not necessarily? Was it mostly like business and production?
So my focus was I took the communication track instead of
Okay.
film. Like
Okay.
while film did have a lot of great professional teachers who, you know, are currently making
Right.
programs for TV,
Hmm.
I wanted to make sure that I'd be working afterwards. And
All
and
right.
since
All right.
the communication track, it also elaborated on they presented it as media as a form of communications in different
Mhm.
elements.
Okay.
So you weren't only learning film, you also had a focus on radio, and there was
Right.
also a focus on UX UI design. Given the Bay
Can
Area
you
being,
elaborate that a little bit? What's the UX UI?
so it's focused on the user experience when you go onto a website.
Okay.
So making it so that it's really friendly for the person. Basically, the idea is to how to make a website as friendly and usable for a person if it's their first time to keep them engaged.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. That's pretty
Yeah.
interesting. So you did a lot of
Yeah.
that, and you did. So it was all kind of communications. Um, what what would you say you learned the most? I guess my thinking is maybe that you learned how to really kind of tell a story from A to B in a ton of different formats, right?
Mhm.
Am I right in that sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
The first couple of terms were really focused on the storytelling methods and within those different platforms.
Sure. Sure.
Story arc, building your story arc, how to, you know, work with the story spine, but also how to communicate, how to help someone else communicate the story that they're trying to tell. Because as a producer, you know, people might present to you ideas, and your work tends to be helping them put that idea to paper that can be translated to whether it's audibly or visually. Or the same with like UX UI design is similar. Like how would you tell that story visually on a website?
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's very. I mean, that's all very interesting. The storytelling, it does. It's a lot of the time. When I'm talking to people, what I hear very often, I guess, is what I'm trying to say is they want the story the way they originally consumed it, whether it's like a book, right? And then you try to
Yeah.
do the same thing, whether it's audibly, which I feel like translates a little bit better to say radio. But when you're doing it
Mhm.
on screen, there's a lot of different things you're just limited by. So the story is going to change.
Yeah.
So being able to kind of translate that and take what you can, adapt it the best way you can, and then mold it into something that's going to kind of maintain the integrity of the original, but also kind of not, I mean, not everyone's good at it, right? Do you feel like you can do that these days? Like, do you have any projects? What are you doing with it?
Yeah, I feel what has grown within the more recent months and even this year is an understanding of helping someone mold what they're trying to share creatively. Luckily for me, I think because I was an older grad student, the professors saw that I was driven to really want to focus and make this my career. So I was able to take on opportunities while I was in school. So before even having a complete understanding, I was kind of thrown into it just because of word of mouth through people that I knew at the radio station, or just from my community work from being here and working with nonprofit organizations. So that real world experience has helped me to take those baby steps early on while I was in school, even before graduating, so that I could become better adapted when entering the work field. And I think a lot of it starts with the pre-production stage, like really being engaged with the person, really having them see different examples. One thing I like to do as well is have them supply me examples to get a sense of what they like. And then just kind of trying to apply those basic principles, because like how you are with audio, I'm sure there's certain things that you at this point that are like, you want to have included in every piece, right? And then you could, so once you have those principles from there, you can either decide whether or not you want to like go with those rules or break those rules.
Okay. And it's all very intentional. Not a lot what you do when telling a story is accidental. Right. I'm assuming so. Or unless it's a happy accident, right? Like Bob Ross. But no, absolutely. That something like you said just resonated. I was doing some film like in production stuff, and very early on, a lot of the stuff that I didn't know how to do personally was very similar along those lines. Was just like, okay, tell me what you want, and then I'll just try to do it. But I very quickly learned that you're going to save yourself a lot of time if you have the client do some homework, right? And you're like, okay, hey, so like you probably have an image in mind. What is that? Do you have examples I can reference to try to replicate it exactly like that? And I mean, that's the difference between you and I, right? You went to school to figure stuff like that out. I figured it out after 15 years of just like not landing, which is, not the easier route. So education, kids, it'll definitely help you. So, I mean, I guess, what are you hoping to do long term? Is it, as far as like my relationship to you and my understanding of you as a human being, you're very much a person who wants to be an advocate for people, help people out, and very active. I'm assuming in your community. How do you want to leverage your education to an extent, your background, to try to help your community in Oakland?
Yeah. So currently, I'd say what I'm doing now is I work with a podcast / YouTube show called Do Rags and Conversations. So I'm the lead producer on that. It's a program that focuses primarily on kind of sharing the word on a lot of creative things that Black and brown people are doing within the Bay Area. So we have everyone from writers come on to the show, photographers, painters, and musicians. And let them share their story about where they're from in the Bay, whether it be Vallejo, Richmond, Oakland, San Francisco, or wherever, but also promoting their work and having them share how they got involved in their work. So if anyone else has a desire to be within any of those realms of art and media, they could learn how other people got involved in it. So that's kind of one of the forms in which I'd like to give back. I do. At this point now, I am able to select who I work with. So if I get an opportunity to work with anyone of color, anyone of the LGBTQIA+ community, anyone who isn't regularly getting a voice, that's who I tend to try to work with. Okay.
So you really make an effort to try to leverage your platform to help people not only get their message out, but also connect them with the masses to, to an extent. Am I right? Okay. I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty awesome, man. I mean, are you interviewing yourself? Are you
Um,
on the show? I mean, I'm doing that right now with you, obviously, so maybe you can kind
yeah.
of repurpose this, but
Well,
is
I
that
haven't been
something?
on a show in a while. I mean, it's
Okay.
been actually quite a while since I've been on like
Okay.
anything, even on air on the radio. Um, I think because I just kind of found like where I was seeing a need and
Okay.
tried to help within that space. Like, so for example, with what's happening now, a lot of people are are needing help transitioning to having their stuff be live streamed.
Hmm.
So one of the things I am doing is I'm working with KPFA as a technical production assistant for moving all of their live in-house um, events that they used to have
Hmm.
with people like Cornell West or to being a Zoom meeting that they can record and then have people watch
Okay.
either during or at a later date.
Right.
But I've also been in talks with other people who are trying to figure out how to rethink spaces that they have
Hmm.
into creating them into a more community focused space so that people who, since a lot of buildings aren't open, can still come in and whether it be record their podcast or do a video or any type of tutorial for yoga or things of that nature.
Hmm.
Um, just having a space to be able to openly do those things is what I'm also working on right now.
Okay. So like kind of so creating a studio space for people to sign up and use essentially to be able to
Exactly, kind
produce
of like a
content.
cooperative.
Okay.
Maybe you could put a little bit of money towards it, but the idea is that what comes with the space is there are members who you could hire to do certain things for you. So let's say you
Uh,
needed to someone to just be the backup on your audio engineering for something. They could come in and you would pay them via Venmo. Or if you needed someone to film it for you, or so it also has an expertise element that's available to you as well for your needs.
okay. I mean, that's really awesome. That's something that's crossed my mind here too, because I'm sure in a larger city, you have much more of a market for it. There's much more people wanting to produce stuff, but there is a lot of people who reach out to me, and I'm sure it happens to you as well, for guidance and consulting on how to do things, and so it a lot of the time, I'm just like, why doesn't this exist already, like a space, a co-op of like or sorts like that, where people can just come in, produce content, because everyone wants to be an influencer these days, and that's fine. That's by all means, do it. But not everyone has the means or the ability to kind of do it, the know-how of how to do those things, or also doesn't understand how much work it takes to produce something. Right? It takes a lot of pre-production, actual shooting or whatever, capturing audio, and then post-production. Then it's like packaging, distribution. Not only that, like booking, all this stuff. So there's a ton of different little things that people don't really understand. They think they just can sit in front of a microphone and they just like it happens. And then you have to be consistent with your content. So a lot of those things just are necessary, right? So you are definitely a resource for people out there, as I try to be for people here. Um, what would you say is, and obviously this is kind of a quick left turn, but you do a lot of really good things for the community. You try to help people. You seem very self-aware of the fact that you do have, to an extent, some privilege in the fact that you have some knowledge, right? That it's almost a responsibility to share with people and to bring your people up. Was there anything in your childhood, anything in your upbringing, your background that really kind of developed this sense of like attempted altruism in you, to try to help others?
Hmm. Well,
Where'd you grow up? I mean, you moved around.
yeah, so I'm a military brat, and like
Okay.
my dad was in the Air Force, but I'm also a church kid, right? And so
Okay.
both of those platforms are usually community focused platforms. Like if
Yeah.
you are an Air Force brat, you grow up on a base which has less than 500 people. So it always kind of
Mm.
feels like you're already in a small community.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows your business. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
move a lot, you have to develop trying to make new friends
Mm.
because you might not be staying in a space for longer than 2 to 4 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, the longest places I have stayed in was New Mexico, but prior to that, we were all over the place.
Okay.
But then also, with being like a church kid, like churches also provide a space for community within themselves,
Yeah.
right? Like where
Absolutely.
people are allowing themselves to be vulnerable, right? Because you have people who are coming in for different needs.
It's a sense
And
of
like,
fellowship. Yeah.
yeah. And so like having to really have a sense of like respect for people, their backgrounds, who they are, since, you know, they are within a vulnerable space. And so I think those two things, but also I was in AmeriCorps as well. And, you know, like with the AmeriCorps and Public Allies, they heavily focus on community and community involvement. I think that's just kind of like with those three experiences, I think it's just kind of really developed my desire to build up people around me. It also helps me learn. Teaching other people helps me remember things, or especially when people operate differently and think differently. Right. Like trying to provide them information in a way in which they understand. Yeah. Or like thinking about, you know, if someone's more a visual learner versus or like someone who likes to write things down. All of those teaching methods also help you in the long run when you're doing things like writing for grants, for example. Right. Like, okay, so this is a way I'm strengthening my skills in how to write out what I mean, or when I'm trying to explain it.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. You know, we are just a culmination of everything we've ever experienced, right? Whether it's loss, negative things, whatever you call it, it's just we end up who we are because of all of that. So, what was your experience like in Albuquerque, man? I mean, you we can just jump in there. What part of, well, you didn't live in Albuquerque primarily, in essentially, right? Or initially, I mean, did you?
Well, I was on you know, I went to high school on the west side, so Rio Rancho. And, you know, back then, I felt, you know, when we moved there, they had just built the high school, so they had just built Rio Rancho High School. Right. And I was like you know, a part of like the first group to graduate or go through the whole 4 years. I mean, the other students had, you know, been all over the place, whether they were at Cibola, Del Norte, West Mesa, prior to the school being built. And I mean, it's interesting to think back to that time frame, because there was so much going on, because it was like that 4 years. We had Columbine, we had 9/11, you know, we had a lot of other like interesting things that's happened within our history.
The world really changed while you were in high school, man. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm at this school, and I mean, thinking back at it now, like me and my brothers there's maybe a total of 20 Black guys, you know, and maybe a total of like 50 Black women who were in attendance during like our time frame. So, you know, like Emmanuel, my middle brother, is maybe 2 years younger than me. So when we were in school at the same time, I think there's maybe only 5 or 6 other Black guys. And then, like, you know,
jeez,
maybe
dude.
like,
well, I mean, it's also New Mexico. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Like, you know, Black population's at 3%, right? Yeah. But, in Rio Rancho, it's primarily white. I don't know. I mean, it was just, I think I wouldn't say that I was absent about race or understanding race issues at that time. Sure. It was just at that time having to adapt to a new environment. And, you know, when we met in college, and I feel like in college I was just I felt like I got along pretty well with everyone. And, you know, I understand like why New Mexico focuses on who it focuses on. It's just because, I mean, the populations there are larger within the Latinx community, Native American community. But I think coming to Oakland, I just kind of wanted to be around like more of my community, you know, like instead of having to like buy hair products online, you know, or like just like the other simple things that like you take for granted, and if you're a smaller percentage, until you're in a space where it's easily available.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that difficult, as far as, you know, little things like that, daily products, right, that you take for granted. If you don't, I guess if you know, until you don't have them. But that's such an interesting thing. You're absolutely right. The percentage of the population here that's African American is very small. So when you do kind of join a group of kids or people, I think in our kind of mutual friend group, maybe it was, I'm going to say you and your brothers made up a large portion of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And it was three of you, right? So it was
Yeah.
like a large portion of it. And I think maybe there might have been a couple others, but like that was a larger kind of group of people, or that kind of class that was at UNM. So it must have, I can imagine it must have felt strange. Must have felt like eyes were on you all the time. At what point, I mean, you were focusing on integrating into kind of a new community and whatnot. At what point did you really start kind of feeling like, okay, this is something I need to call out on a daily basis? Or is that something you even feel like you have to do?
Yeah, it's like I don't know. But just my experience in New Mexico was just so different than my experience here.
Sure.
And it's interesting to reflect and think back. I guess for me, you know, because I grew up like I was a skateboarder. So when I first started attending, like I think with skateboarding, you're like there isn't necessarily. I mean, there's obviously a dominant white culture in skateboarding, but in New Mexico, you have anyone skateboards. That's one thing I do. The one thing I do appreciate about New Mexico is even if though my culture wasn't represented there as much, it still had a level of diversity that even other states and cities lack. And like and so I feel that, you know, so I felt
I mean, like I always say that I felt like kind of, I didn't realize until I started traveling more within the United States, right? Maybe not internationally, but like I started realizing how sheltered I was in New Mexico from a lot of stuff. Because there's a lot of brown people here, right? Of all different shades.
Yeah.
And when you start, say you're in the South, you stick out like a sore thumb and you feel eyes on you. So was there that transition when you went there? Was it, you know, for the lack of a better statement or I guess phrase, was it more black and white when you went to Oakland versus when it was here?
Yeah, I mean, there's like, I remember, I guess the feeling that I think is different about Oakland versus New Mexico is in New Mexico, you know, you could run into anybody anywhere, whether it's the gas station or, you know, I don't know, picking up food or whatever. Here, you're just kind of another person that's around. But also here, there's definitely like a larger presence of brown. I mean, there's a lot of different types of black people here, like people lighter skinned than me, darker than me, mixed. You know, there's just a larger variety. Different languages spoken from black people, whether it's like, you know, French, because they were like, you know, maybe somewhere from like Congo or something, for example, or Eritrean people, Ethiopian people. So it's just kind of like, I mean, it was refreshing. It was like, oh, this is nice. This is kind of nice. I'm, you know, to just see different people of my skin complexion, or even different brown people. I mean, there's lots of Hondurans, people from Ecuador, people from Peru.
They're not just all like New Mexican or Mexican, right? There's a larger variety of different people, right? And no, it's an actual city. If it's, not Albuquerque the city. Don't get me wrong, but like, you know what I mean? It's a larger city. It's the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I just didn't really. I mean, I know this is gonna probably sound like I don't want it to sound like I was somebody that was unaware, but you know, when we were in England, like it was kind of like that as well. Like when we were in, I think we were in Bedfordshire, it was also like that. You had like a larger mix of people. I guess like when I was younger, you know, in the 2000s, early 2000s, I just didn't really think about it that much. And I think a point of when I started to think about it more was probably around it had to have been around the time frame that I want to say maybe Mike Brown, when he was killed. That people were having conversations with me about race that I knew personally, or even just like going out, people would ask me questions because I was like the only a black guy around. So they
How
wanted
do
to
you,
ask
how do
me
you feel
questions
about
about
that?
like how am I feeling.
Yeah. How do you feel about people coming up to you? I mean, that's a thing, right? Obviously, I know it's a
Yeah.
thing. Like, it's a thing. And sometimes I pick my battles, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to be complicit in you learning it the wrong way. But
Right.
how do you feel about that? People coming to you?
I mean, at that point in time, you know, I was kind of having mixed feelings about how I felt about white people, I'd say. You know, there were things that would happen like in Rio Rancho that like I would maybe like let slide, or that were just like stupid things that maybe somebody would say. But
Right.
I think that really kind of opened my eyes, but also with like the spread of like, you know, Facebook got bigger at that time. And the thing that I think is kind of harmful about platforms like Facebook is it allows you to curate your audience. So people started to get more emboldened within their racism, whether or not they saw it as racism. It's like you can create your own audience so that all you're getting fed is this perspective. So whether it's someone as nutty as Alex Jones, or whether it's like the only source of information you're getting is Fox and you're sharing it with, you can delete people who disagree with you. Yeah. And so I feel like around that time, I did see people who I personally knew, like even from like high school, who were just saying some things that were really crazy. And then being like, okay, you do realize that, like, you know, blah, blah, and or if I confronted them, they would just immediately remove me from their friend list. So it wasn't even a chance to have like a conversation sometimes.
Yeah.
That's when I feel like there was a big shift. I think luckily, like for me, I wasn't targeted in New Mexico nearly as much as like maybe other people that I know personally in my personal life, because at that point in time when I was in Rio Rancho, I was still very much like a military brat kid. You know, I had like a fade all the time. I worked at a resort, you know, outside of Rio Rancho called the Tamaya. So, you know, I'm engaged with rich people and stuff. But there were still a lot of those comments that you would hear, like, "Oh, you sound really educated." Like,
you're so well spoken.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah. Like okay.
Yeah.
Well, if I were to speak any other way, I would not be educated. If I had any like slang or something, I'm suddenly not educated.
Right. It's
you know,
little did you know I'm using my white voice.
yeah, exactly. It's like, but
right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
I mean, I think you're onto something there. I'm thinking back to timing and when all this kind of started going down, and a lot of the time, you know, obviously this stuff was going on for a long time, and it was happening to us, like microaggressions and all this stuff. But I always say that it was like just after 2010. You know, obviously when Barack Obama became president, I think a lot of it was kind of around that as well. But then social media, I think, had a big part in it, and the way it exploded. And maybe it wasn't maybe because we were so isolated before, and all of a sudden we were able to connect with people that were like-minded, like us, and maybe information started spreading faster. Yeah, you're able to curate it, and it just as it does on one end of the spectrum, as far as political or ideals go, it's the same way the other way. And so do you think maybe the social media, and I'm just kind of bouncing an idea off of you, do you think social media was what kind of brought all this out? And again, I'll echo what a lot of people say. It's not that this wasn't happening before, it's just that there's cameras everywhere now, right? What do you think?
I mean, that's a really good point. I think that it's allowing people to see and get a better understanding of like about what is being said when you're not in the room, right? Like there's this guy, I think his name's Tariq Nasheed, and he always, when he used to have people, his show would be more of a call-in show, and people would ask him for advice, like, you know, I'm a young white male, and, you know, I am concerned with these issues, like, how can I show support? He would always tell them, like, you know, how you could show support is letting us know what is being said when we're not in the room. And I think people have gotten so comfortable with their platforms now that they are saying things that may have traditionally have been said after, you know, someone like you and I had left a party, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself is a good. I mean, it's good. It can be shocking at times, but it is also good because now you have a better sense of like where people lie. Because I think a lot of racism isn't as overt as media would like us to think. Like, you know, maybe like the person with the Confederate flag on the back of their truck. It's more of these microaggressions that may impact your ability to even, let's say, get a raise.
Or like the unconscious bias, right? So it's more, it's not it's the big things are what get media attention, and that's what they focus on. But it's the little things on a day-to-day basis that really hold us back, is what you're getting at, right? Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. I mean, do you feel like, you know, your name when you're applying to things or promotions or anything comes up, do you feel like it's impacted you or your ability to kind of?
For sure. Like,
Yeah.
I used to work at a call center and like in Rio Rancho, and, you know, with like me having a Jewish name,
I was going to say, like, your name's like, very Jewish.
Yeah. There's always an assumption when they would get on the phone with me that I was a Jewish guy. And then like, they would just say something like really messed up. And, you know, so I'd hang up on them or something because they felt comfortable, right? They felt like comfortable with this idea that like, oh, he's one of us. And,
really? Okay.
Yeah, that would happen pretty routinely. That's when I worked for a AT&T call center. Yeah, like back in the day. But no, I mean, I have no doubt that like some people are surprised if I show up to a job interview and they like see my name and then they see my face and they're like, what? Like, a good friend of mine back in like 2008, we used to call him Punk Rock Dan. He moved to Portland, and he's just light skinned Hispanic, but he speaks Spanish as his first language.
Yeah.
His name's Daniel Castillo, and he had been a certified like pharmacy tech for many years in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And I remember I flew up there and was hanging out with him, and he said, I applied to so many different companies that I knew that I was more than qualified for out here. One day I decided not to put my last name. So I just wrote Daniel Smith, and he said the same people immediately contacted me back. So it's like little things like that I think are more present in liberal cities, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's it is that, you know, I joke that there's this kind of this white liberalism, right? It's white liberalism is the idea of just like, oh, we're very liberal on paper.
Yeah.
But when it actually comes into practice, what are you doing? And maybe it's unconscious, right? You know, I that's the thing about unconscious bias. Everyone has it. And everyone does it. And we're going to prefer people that look like us because that's what we know. And it's plain and simple. So people shouldn't be scared to address it. But it's having the awareness to kind of do something about it. But people do hide under that kind of guise of just sort of that blanket of veil, whatever you want to say, of liberalism, that they say that, you know, I'm liberal, so therefore anything I do is fine. But so they stop doing the work to actually, you know, be better. And that's a bummer because it does happen in, you know, the New England, which is somehow one of the most liberal parts of the country, but it's also, in my experience, one of the most racist. You know,
definitely, yeah.
You know, and you're just like, okay, so what is actually happening here? And it's a lot of when you know, white people come up to you and tell you like, did you know? I'm like, yeah, I knew. I lived my life, right? So of course I knew. Which kind of brings to mind something that I want to run by you. And unfortunately or unfortunately, people call me oatmeal cream pies because I'm brown on the outside, white on the inside. And I hang out with a lot of white people. It's just kind of how it goes. I try to diversify it, but it's just kind of how it happened, right? Growing up here. Or at least that's how my dad wanted it. But do you find yourself ever kind of confronting yourself with the overly woke white person who all they want to talk about is this stuff? And it just annoys the shit out of you? Like, I mean, I'm thinking of someone in particular, and I'm not going to say who, but that's like, I'm just like, dude, like, okay, like I got it. Like, I know, like, you don't have to tell me this stuff. Like, I live it every single day. Can we just like hang out? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely happened to me. It's been a while, I'd say, but
I appreciate you
with
listening to
KPF,
the event. Yeah.
no, I totally get it. Like with KPFA being a publicly funded radio station,
Yeah.
people have the opportunity to come in and work the fund drive. So, like basically they're volunteers who
Hmm.
have been giving money to the radio station for many
Right.
years. Occasionally, if I need some extra cash, I'll manage the fund drive room. And usually if I
Hmm.
manage the fund drive room, there's always one person that wants to talk my ear off about like the issues addressing the Black community.
Right.
And, it's like an older white guy, an older white lady. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I mean, yeah, but can you answer the phone, please? But
Yeah. No. And
I
then
used to work for
yeah. Yeah. They started
I
work
used to
from
work
home.
for a organization called the Restaurant Opportunity Center,
Hmm.
and they were started by survivors of 9/11. There used to be a really nice restaurant up there that had one of the best wine programs, and
Hmm.
the majority of the people that were staffed there were from other countries. And
Oh.
once 9/11 had happened, a lot of the funding that people were giving went primarily to the firefighters and the police
Hmm.
department, because they had these bigger unions.
Hmm.
People recognized them as like these great social workers, so they were kind of left behind and they had a really hard time receiving some of that same money.
Hmm.
The families of the people who were murdered during that time frame.
Yeah.
So they created a group, restaurant organization, to help them receive some of that funding, but also train diverse groups of people
Hmm.
and knowing their rights. And so when I was working with them, we partnered with a couple of the different restaurant owners in San Francisco, one being Daniel Patterson. He's
Hmm.
a pretty big name out here,
Yeah.
and a couple of others, to create a racial equity toolkit.
Hmm.
And the goal of the toolkit was to help people be conscious of their bias when it comes to hiring decisions, as a way of removing some of those ideals that you may already have, because the restaurant industry tends to be one of the more diverse industries that we have, where you're going to have people who are just trying to start anew, whether they're immigrated or
Yeah.
people of color who are currently here, just getting their feet on the ground. So part of that was that education. I was also a representative for this toolkit at different conferences
Hmm.
in San Francisco. And, yes, I would definitely get someone who, after I spoke about what we had done
Yeah.
and what is being done at the restaurant, that would always pull me aside and, talk my ear off about, or like, how can I help as a white person? Or, I want to know what I can do.
Right. Yeah. I know. I know.
So,
That's yeah. So I mean, it happens a lot, and it happens a lot. So again, it's like, if you're listening to this and you happen to be one of those people, that's fine. Like I get it. Like, you're curious, but like, look it up,
yeah,
or and don't be. If I'm gonna take my time with it. If I can, I will. Because again, I'm personally, I mean, I don't want to be complicit in somebody learning it the right way, because there is a lot of misinformation out there.
right.
So, and that's an issue, right? That's a big issue out there. So with the being part of, I mean, you're part of the media, right? How do you feel about the state of kind of the US right now, and how people view the media?
Yeah. There's a lot of, I, I, it's really, it's what I think is really sad is that the majority of people are getting their news from a social media platform.
Right.
And the reason why I say that's sad is because social media platforms, they receive money through ads,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't really have to hold themselves to a high moral integrity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're going to take whoever pays them.
Right.
So whether they do research into the person's purposes or the
Mm-hmm.
person's background is totally not necessarily what they care about.
Right.
It's more about, you pay me to run your ad, so if you go to click on a lot of these platforms, you'll see that they're covered in ads, primarily because that's how they're making their money.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty hard living in the U.S. to receive any form of news that doesn't have a biased opinion on it, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's liberal or conservative. I think, well, for one, that it has a lot of positives in the fact that, like, people that are Black and brown can now have their voices heard and are being able to have outlets of having their voices heard without having to rely heavily on a network that has a white head. So like if I wanted to create my own form of news media, I now have an opportunity to do that. But it's hard to say how filtered it would get. Like, because even YouTube's making a lot of changes for people, is what I heard. Like people's ability to make money off of this.
Oh yeah, you have to have like, there's a baseline as to how many follows, how many views you have to have within a certain amount of time to even qualify.
Right, and so there are still challenges of keeping your voices out there, getting your voices out there. But I do think there is still better options. Yeah. But what I think is lacking is I think that there isn't enough pressure on some of these larger organizations to be accountable for what they are allowing to be spread as news on their platform. So it's kind of like, yes, I don't want there to be necessarily censorship, but I do think that if something isn't stating the facts or the truth, there should be some way of like making the people who are reading it aware, versus just letting it be out there. I think that we're kind of going in that direction.
Okay. How so?
I think because, well, for one, like there were the interviews that Congress had with Facebook. And I mean, it was obvious that like they didn't understand how Facebook worked, but I think that there was at least a concern for, you know, wanting people to be provided information that is factual. And I think people are going to want to be provided information that is factual. Yeah, but when, I don't know, I think.
Or how are you kind of contributing to that to try to make it better, I guess? I know you might have already answered that, but.
I guess for me, it's just trying to get people's voices out there.
Right.
Another show I used to do was Berkeley Out Loud.
Yeah.
And I didn't always completely agree with what the guests said or who the guests were, but I felt it was important for them to be able to be heard, because they may not have had another way of even spreading their platform's knowledge.
Right.
And so I think that's how I see my work going forward, as being a way of having a positive impact on my community, is really helping those people who don't know how to spread their word or share their story do it properly.
That's awesome, man. That's really good. Do you have a show right now? What's going on? Do you promote anything, or do you have any events that you are plugging, anything like that? Or are you just kind of doing your own thing?
Well, I guess we have taken a break, but Do Rags and Conversations is currently on YouTube. We're going to be picking up again this coming fall. Right now we have about 15 episodes. It's also on Spotify if you prefer the Audible version.
What is it called again?
Do Rags and Conversations.
Do Rags and Conversations?
Yeah. And then the other show is
Nice.
Wanderlust. Wanderlust will be coming this fall.
Cool.
Primarily on YouTube platforms. It's starting off with 6 episodes. It is a African American women hiking and adventure show.
Nice.
Next year, I am working with a dance company called Raw Dance. We're going to be having, well, depending on the state of how things are going, you know, like whether or not we have a cure or remedy or anything. But we will be putting together a immersive piece that will involve video projection mapping and visuals at the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, the park, Salesforce Park in San Francisco. Okay.
That's awesome. So, I mean, share the links with me if you can, if you have those, and then I'll go ahead and share with you guys if you're listening. Any words of wisdom to anybody out there? Any of the listeners?
Yeah, I think if you do have a passion about something and you think that this is what you want to do, go for it. I mean, for me, like I knew even in the middle school that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be a director and that I wanted to be a producer. But at the time, you know, how to get there and how to get to where I am and where I'm going, I didn't have a clue. But I think try to keep that goal in mind. I know the arts are scary to get into, especially right now. But if you do put in the work and you show that you have commitment, people will put time into you and helping you to get on your path. That's the advice that I would give any young person who's currently interested in going into any form of media.
Yeah.
Don't let that dream go. Like,
Okay.
and even if it's not that clear yet, if you could, you never know who has resources, get used to the idea of talking about it. Because I think that for people of color, we have a hard time talking about what it is that we want to do or what we're doing, because we're more humble. We don't like to boast. We don't like to, be the center of attention. But try to get in the practice of really speaking things into existence. And I didn't necessarily used to believe in that, but it does work. No,
absolutely. There's a power to it. You say it out loud, right? Man, that resonated with me today. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you being on. So, I mean, if you guys are listening, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to just rate, subscribe, and follow the links and support everything that's going on here in the world any way you can.